"It's been 9 months," she said. "9 months since you looked at me like I was someone you chose." He didn't turn around. He was standing at the bathroom mirror, adjusting his cufflinks, already dressed for an evening she had not been invited to. The tuxedo fit perfectly. He had picked it up from the tailor last Thursday. She knew because she had signed for the delivery. Corrine. His voice carried the particular flatness of a man who has already decided the conversation is beneath him. Not tonight. She had been rehearsing this for 6 weeks. The exact words, the exact moment, the right tone between desperate and dignified. She had practiced it in the shower, in the car on the way to work, lying awake at 3 in the morning, while his side of the bed sat empty and cool. And now the words dissolved the moment she opened her mouth. Because that was the thing about loving someone who had stopped loving ya back. It made you smaller, even when you were trying to stand tall. "You're going to the Meridian Foundation dinner," she said. "Not a question. It's a work event. You're taking her." He set down the cufflink. He breathed out through his nose. "Corrine, say my name like that one more time," she said quietly, "and I'll know exactly where we stand." He turned then, and the look on his face was not guilt, and not love, and not even the decency of shame. It was inconvenience. She was inconvenient to him. After 11 years of marriage, after building a life together from 2 studio apartments and a shared credit card, and a dream neither of them had been entirely sure would work, she had become an inconvenience. "I don't want to fight," he said. "Then tell me the truth." A pause, long enough to be its own answer. "Vanessa and I." He stopped, started again. "It's not something I planned." There it was. The sentence she had been dreading for 9 months. The one she had been constructing in her own mind from scraps of evidence. His phone face down on every table. The new cologne. The way he flinched when she reached for his hand in public. She had known. She had known and kept not knowing because the knowing was unsurvivable. "You should have the papers ready," he said, not unkindly, which was almost worse. "I've spoken to a lawyer. It's better if we move through this quickly." Cleaner. The room went silent. Corrine Hadley had been, before she became someone's wife, a woman who did not flinch. Her mother had raised her in rural Tennessee with the particular brand of backbone that comes from watching a woman manage everything alone and never once complain about it. She had put herself through grad school. She had built the Hearthline Foundation from a single shared office and 3 folding chairs into one of the most respected literacy nonprofits in the state. She had done hard things before, but standing in her own bedroom, in the home she had decorated and tended and made warm, listening to her husband tell her the marriage was over with the same tone he used to cancel dinner reservations. That was a different kind of hard. He picked up his jacket. He checked his watch. He kissed her on the forehead, which was the cruelest thing he could have done, and he left. The front door clicked behind him. She stood very still for a long moment. Then she sat down on the edge of the bed, and she pressed both hands flat against her knees, and she breathed. She didn't cry. She had used up a significant portion of her annual crying in the months prior. What came instead was something quieter and more devastating, a kind of clarity, the specific brutal clarity of a woman who has finally been told what she had already, on some cellular level, known. She stood. She walked to the window. His car backed out of the driveway below, headlights cutting across the wet street, and then he was gone. She was still standing there 10 minutes later when her phone buzzed, her best friend, Tamara, turning on the TV to watch something embarrassingly bad. "You in?" She almost said yes. She almost put on her sweats and opened a bottle of whatever was left in the cabinet and let the evening dissolve into something manageable and numbing. Instead, she looked at the closet. At the back of it, behind the dry-cleaned blazers and the 2 formal dresses she never quite had occasion for, was a garment bag her mother had shipped to her 3 years ago, 2 weeks before she passed. There had been a note pinned to the outside. Her mother's handwriting, which had always looked more like a drawing than text. "Wear this when you need to remind yourself who raised you. I'll be watching." Corrine unzipped the bag. The gown inside was a deep midnight blue, the color of a sky just before the stars appear. It had been designed in the 70s for a woman who wore things with intention rather than fashion, and it showed. Clean lines, impeccable drape, the kind of garment that required a certain posture to carry and rewarded that posture in turn. Her mother had worn it to exactly one event, a university fundraiser, where she had walked in knowing 2 people and left with 6 job offers and a standing ovation for a speech she had not prepared. Corrine held it against herself and looked in the mirror. There was a version of this night where she ordered takeout and waited for the world to feel survivable again. She chose the other version. She showered. She did her makeup with the focus and deliberateness of someone diffusing something. She pressed her hair into soft waves that sat just past her jaw. She lined her eyes dark, kept her lips quiet, put on the earrings her mother had left alongside the gown, small drops of amber that caught the light like something alive. When she stepped back and looked at her reflection, she was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up her car keys. She hadn't planned to go anywhere specific. She had simply needed to not be inside those 4 walls, in that bedroom, breathing air that still smelled faintly of his cologne and the collapse of everything she had believed in. She drove. The city opened up around her the way it always did at night. All lit windows and moving headlights, and the sense that other people's lives were continuing uninterrupted, which was at once comforting and unbearable. She was sitting at a red light on Hargrove Street when she saw the sign outside the Alderton Hotel. Meridiantation Annual Gala, tonight. She gripped the steering wheel. She thought about Vanessa, in whatever dress she had chosen, on the arm of the man Corrine had married. She thought about what her mother would have done. She parked the car. The lobby of the Alderton was all marble and warm gold light, the kind of hotel that made you instinctively adjust your posture. Corrine walked through the entrance with her chin level and her hands still, the midnight blue gown catching the light at every step. At the entrance to the gala, she gave her name. The woman at the check-in table glanced at the list, paused, glanced again. Miss Hadley. Oh, something shifted in the woman's expression. Of course, Hearthline Foundation. You're a board partner with the Meridian. Your table is already confirmed. She had forgotten. The joint partnership between Hearthline and the Meridian Foundation. The one she had negotiated personally. The one her husband had called a nice networking opportunity and never attended a single event for. She was on the list because she had put herself there. Before he had started disappearing. Before the cologne changed. Before 9 months of sleeping beside a stranger became 11 years of marriage, dissolving into a single cool sentence in a bathroom mirror. She walked in. The Alderton's main ballroom was the kind of room that made first impressions a competitive sport. Chandeliers like suspended ice. Tables dressed in white linen with single stems of something expensive and architectural. A jazz quartet in the corner playing something that nobody was quite listening to. The city's philanthropic class in their finest, performing the familiar rituals of people who had done well and wanted others to know it. Nobody was prepared for what stepped through the doors. Corrine Hadley moved through that room the way a woman moves when she has nothing left to protect and nothing left to pretend. No performance in it, no calculation. She simply walked, the gown flowing behind her, the amber earrings catching every light source in the room. And the effect was immediate and cumulative. Heads turned, conversations paused mid-sentence, and a woman near the champagne table leaned over to her companion and said something that made them both stare. Across the room, near the windows that overlooked the city skyline, a man named Sutton Graves was in the middle of explaining the foundation's new rural education initiative to 2 board members when he stopped speaking. He was not a man who stopped mid-sentence. Sutton Graves was 44, silver-templed, built like someone who had played contact sports in college, and then discovered that the real contact sport was business. He had founded the Meridian Foundation 12 years ago, after selling his first company and deciding that what he actually wanted to do with money was use it for something. He was known for being measured, precise, unhurried, the kind of man who only said things when he meant them, and had trained himself out of the habit of saying things he didn't. He watched the woman in the midnight blue dress walk into his foundation's annual gala, and he forgot what he had been talking about. "Excuse me," he said to no one in particular. He crossed the room without quite deciding to. Corrine had stopped at a high table near the terrace entrance, setting down her clutch, taking stock of the room the way someone does when they are buying themselves a moment. She was scanning the crowd with the particular expression of a woman who has come somewhere that should feel hostile and has decided, on the spot, that it doesn't. "I don't recognize you," said a voice beside her, "which means I either missed the introduction or you haven't been to one of these before." She turned. The man beside her was watching her with an expression that was not a line and not a performance. It was genuine curiosity, the kind that shows in the eyes before the face knows it's showing. "Neither," she said. "I've been to 3 of these." "You may not have noticed. I would have noticed," he said. She looked at him steadily. "I'm Corrine Hadley, Hearthline Foundation." Something moved across his face. "Sutton Graves." He offered his hand. "You're the Hearthline director. I've been trying to get a meeting with you for 6 months. My assistant has been trying to get a meeting with you for 8. He smiled. It was not a polished smile. It was the kind that arrives before the person means to let it. "Consider us met." She almost smiled back. Almost they talked. She hadn't planned to. She had planned to have one glass of something sparkling, to exist in the room for 40 minutes, as proof of something she was still defining, and to leave before anyone saw her cry in a bathroom. But Sutton Graves asked about Hearthline with the specific focus of someone who had actually read the annual reports, and she found herself answering in the way she always did when someone asked the right questions, fully, without reservation. The way she talked when she forgot she was supposed to be performing a version of herself. He didn't interrupt. He didn't reach for his phone. He stood with his whole attention directed at her, like it was the only place his attention had any interest in going. At some point, he brought her a glass of sparkling water, because he had noticed hers was empty, and he had done it without breaking the conversation, without making a show of it. The way someone does when taking care of another person is simply a reflex rather than a gesture. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," he said. She looked at him. "Why are you being so?" She stopped. "Attentive," he offered. "I was going to say kind." He considered this. "Because you walked into this room carrying something heavy and you didn't let it show. That takes a specific kind of strength. I find it worth acknowledging." She looked away first. It was then that she saw them. Across the ballroom, near the foundation's display wall, her husband was standing with his hand on the small of another woman's back. Vanessa was tall, auburn-haired, in a green dress that suited her. They were laughing at something. He was leaning in close, the body language of 2 people who had stopped pretending they were only colleagues. Corrine watched them for exactly 1 moment. Then she looked back at Sutton. "My husband is here," she said quietly. Sutton didn't look across the room. He looked at her. "I know who your husband is," he said. "Philip Hadley. He runs Alderton Capital Partners. He's been trying to get a seat on the Meridian board for 2 years. A pause. "He's also been standing 40 feet away from you for the last 20 minutes and hasn't looked once in your direction." Something in Corrine's chest cracked, clean and quiet, like ice shifting. "I found out tonight," she said. It came out before she decided to say it. "He told me before he left the house. He's been seeing her for I don't know how long. He wants to move through the divorce quickly." He said, "Cleaner," that was his word. "Cleaner." Sutton was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said, not with the reflexive ease of someone covering social distance. He said it like he meant the weight of it. "Don't be," she said. "I think I've known for months. I just kept choosing not to." "That's not weakness," he said. "That's hope. There's a difference." She looked at him. "Tell me about Hearthline," he said gently, "from the beginning. Not the version in the annual report, the real version." And so she did. She told him about the first office, which had been a converted storage room in a church basement. About the first grant rejection, which she had taped to her refrigerator as a reminder that being told no was not a verdict. About the night she had stood in front of a room of 12 kids in a rural school district who didn't own a book. Not one, not a single book in the house. And made a promise she wasn't entirely sure she could keep, and then spent the next 3 years keeping it. He listened like there was nothing else in the room. At the terrace doors, she caught a glimpse of Philip watching them. She had expected to feel something when that happened. Satisfaction, grief, vindication, something. Instead, she felt only a distant, clarifying calm, like watching weather through glass. It was another 20 minutes before Philip approached. He had lost some of his composure. His tie was slightly looser. He moved with the particular carefulness of a man who had been drinking in order to build up to something. "Corrine," he said it the way he always did now, careful and flat. "I didn't know you were coming." She turned. "That's funny," she said. "I didn't know I was either." He glanced at Sutton, back at her. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, recalculation. "Can we talk?" he said. "We're talking now," he dropped his voice. "You're wearing your mother's dress." "Yes, you never wear that." "No," she agreed. "I never had the right occasion." Philip was quiet for a moment. She watched the understanding move across his face. Slow, late, expensive. He was seeing her in a way he hadn't in a very long time. Maybe the way he had at the beginning, before she became furniture, before she became background, before 11 years of being loved and then unloving had sanded her down to something he walked past without noticing. "You look." He stopped. "I know," she said. His jaw worked. "I made a mistake tonight, Corrine. What I said was true," she said. "The mistake wasn't what you said. The mistake was the 9 months before it, when you could have said something honest and chose not to." He pressed his hand to his mouth, a gesture she knew from 1,000 other arguments, 1,000 other moments of him collecting himself before responding. She had spent a decade reading that gesture. She would never have to read it again. "I'm going to be honest with you," she said. "Not because you deserve it, but because I need to hear myself say it." She held his gaze. "I loved you completely. I built a life with you that I was proud of, and you treated that life like it was something you could set down and pick back up whenever you felt like it. That's not something I'm willing to forgive. Not because I'm incapable of it, but because I finally figured out the difference between forgiveness and participation." Philip was silent. She reached into her clutch and set something on the table between them. An envelope, the one he had placed on the kitchen counter before leaving. He had printed it out, had it notarized, had made it efficient. "I'll have my attorney review this by Monday," she said. "I'll sign whatever is fair. I don't want a war." She paused. "But I also don't want you to mistake my decency for devastation. I'm going to be fine, Philip. Better than fine." He looked at the envelope, then at her. "I know," he said, and it was the most honest thing he had said in 9 months. There was grief in it, real grief, but it was the grief of a man who understood too late that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment. Not grief for her, grief for himself. It was at this moment that Sutton stepped forward. He didn't perform it. He didn't posture or circle. He simply moved to her side naturally, with the ease of someone who belonged there, and extended his hand to Philip. "Philip Hadley," he said. "Sutton Graves." Philip shook the hand automatically, the way men do in rooms like this. Then he registered the name. The color shifted slightly in his face. "Graves," he said. "Meridian Foundation. That's right." Sutton kept his voice conversational, pleasant, entirely without malice. "My board has been reviewing partnership applications for the next funding cycle. Your firm submitted a proposal last quarter." Philip straightened. "We did, yes. I was hoping to discuss it tonight, actually. I wanted to tell you in person," Sutton said, "before the formal notification goes out next week." He paused, just a beat. "We won't be moving forward with that application. The Meridian Foundation has a values alignment requirement for all institutional partners. Not just the work they do professionally, but the judgment they demonstrate personally. After what I've observed this evening, I don't believe the alignment is there." He said it without anger, without pleasure, without drama. The way a man states a fact. "My team will send the official notice Monday morning." Philip stood very still. Sutton turned back to Corrine. "There's a woman near the east table who runs an education initiative in 3 counties I think you'd want to know about," he said. "Shall I introduce you?" Corrine looked at Philip one last time, not with triumph, not with cruelty, with the clean, finished look of someone who has closed a chapter and knows what comes next. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that." They walked away. Behind them, Philip Hadley stood alone with a rejected partnership proposal, an accepted divorce envelope, and the very specific silence of a man watching everything he thought he was worth walk out of a room on its own. Vanessa found him 20 minutes later. She took one look at his face and asked what had happened. He told her, the Meridian, the proposal, the formal notice. She listened. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment that stretched longer than it should have. Then she set down her glass. "I should tell you something," she said. Her voice had a quality he hadn't heard in it before, flat, certain. I've been telling myself this was more than it was. I think I knew it wasn't. She picked up her clutch. I'm not the kind of woman who stays in something when the thing I was in it for is gone. He stared at her. The merger, she said simply. If the Meridian pulled their partnership, the anchor funding for Q4 falls through, which means the firm restructures. She paused. I'm sorry, Philip. I'm genuinely sorry. But I can't afford to be sorry and stay. She left. He stood there for a long time after that, holding a champagne flute he no longer wanted, surrounded by the city's philanthropic class, wearing a tuxedo that had been tailored for a version of himself that no longer had anything to recommend it. There is not always a thunderclap when things collapse. Sometimes it is quieter than that. Sometimes it is only a man in a well-lit room, alone in the particular way that reveals itself to other people, whether or not he wants it to, understanding at last the precise dimensions of what he has thrown away for nothing that lasted. On the other side of the ballroom, Corrine Hadley was in conversation with a woman named Dr. Alicia Foss, who ran a 3-county reading program that had served 4,000 children in the last fiscal year with no federal funding and 2 part-time staff. Corrine was leaning forward slightly, the way she did when something mattered. Sutton stood nearby, letting it happen, watching her with the expression of a man who keeps having the same thought and keeps finding it true. Later, when the gala had thinned and the jazz quartet had packed up and the waiters were clearing the last of the white linen tables, he found her on the terrace. She was looking out at the city with her hands resting on the railing, the midnight blue gown moving slightly in the night air. She looked, he thought, like a woman who was landing somewhere after a long flight and was only now understanding how tired she'd been. How are you doing? He asked. She considered this honestly. Strange, she said, but the good kind of strange. The kind where everything is different, and that's not a bad thing. He stood beside her. The city stretched below them, lit and moving. Dr. Foss and I are going to meet next week, she said. I think Hearthline can fund 2 of her program sites. It won't solve everything, but it's a start. It usually is, he said. She turned to look at him. Why did you do that with Philip? You didn't have to. The Meridian's values clause is real, he said. I didn't invent it for the occasion, but you chose to invoke it tonight. Yes, he said. I did. She held his gaze. Why? He thought about it for a moment. The kind of consideration that means someone is being honest rather than strategic. Because I watched a man walk into a room where his wife was clearly the most extraordinary person present, he said, and spend the entire night looking somewhere else. And I found that not just personally unfortunate, but philosophically indefensible. A pause. The Meridian Foundation doesn't partner with people who don't know what's worth paying attention to. She was quiet for a moment. That's either the most interesting professional rationale I've ever heard, she said, or the most elaborate way anyone has ever told me something personal. Could be both, he said. Something shifted in the air between them. The comfortable quiet of people who have already, somehow, said the things that matter. I should tell you something, he said. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a card, a business card, but handwritten on the back, a number. His direct line, she understood, not the Foundation's reception. I've wanted to call you for 2 years. I kept telling myself it was about the organizational partnership. I think I was waiting until I had an honest reason. She looked at the card. This is a very formal way to ask for a second conversation, she said. I'm a formal person, he said, in the sense that I mean everything I put in writing. Call me next week, she said. After the Foss meeting, we'll figure out what we're actually talking about. I'll call you Monday, he said. She almost corrected him. She didn't. She drove home at 11:30 through a city that looked identical to the one she had driven through 3 hours ago, and felt entirely different, not because anything had been resolved, because nothing had been, not really, not yet. The divorce would be slow and clean and painful in its own specific ways. The empty side of the bed would be what it was. The house would have to be renegotiated and sorted, and slowly relearned as hers alone. But she had gone out tonight in her mother's dress, and she had walked into a room that could have broken her, and she had not broken. She had signed nothing and surrendered nothing, and bent nothing that was not hers to bend. She pulled into the driveway, and sat in the car for a moment with the engine off. She reached up and touched one of her mother's amber earrings, small and warm and real. For the night you need to remember who raised you, she remembered. The following Monday, Sutton called at 9:15. They talked for 2 hours about Dr. Foss's program, about Hearthline's expansion model, about the specific gap in rural reading readiness that nobody was funding adequately. She forgot twice that it was a professional call. He forgot once, on purpose. The divorce was finalized 7 months later. Corrine kept the house. Philip moved into a 2-bedroom near his office, in the part of the city where everything was convenient and nothing was particular. The firm restructured after the Q4 funding fell through. He stayed on as a managing partner, reduced, quieter. Vanessa accepted a position with a firm in Atlanta and did not say goodbye. Occasionally, on weekends, Philip would drive through the old neighborhood. He would see the lights on in the house. Sometimes, through the kitchen window, he would see Corrine at the counter, laughing at something on the phone, or reading, or just moving through her own life with the unconcerned ease of a woman who had figured out where she was supposed to be. He would keep driving. He understood now, clearly and permanently, that the life in that window was not something that had been taken from him. It was something he had set down with both hands and walked away from, and it had simply, quietly continued without him. Hearthline expanded to 6 new sites in the first year after the Meridian partnership formalized. Corrine hired 3 program directors and moved the headquarters into a proper building with windows and a conference room that fit 12 people. Dr. Foss's program became the flagship rural model. Mrs. Alderton, the foundation chair, cited Corrine's work in her annual address as the most significant development in regional literacy funding in a decade. Sutton was in the audience when she said it. He was not there as a board member. He was there because Corrine had saved him a seat. 14 months after the night of the gala, on a Saturday morning in October, when the light was doing something unreasonable and beautiful through the kitchen windows, Corrine made coffee and found a small box on the counter, no wrapping, no note. Just a box, the kind that jewelry comes in, plain and dark and understated. She opened it. The ring inside was not extravagant. It was a simple setting, a warm antique stone, deep and clear, the color of something gathered over time rather than manufactured. The kind of ring that meant I thought about this carefully rather than I wanted to impress you. Sutton was standing in the doorway. I've been carrying that for 3 weeks, he said. I kept waiting for the right moment, and then I realized I was doing the thing where I overplan and underact. She looked at the ring, then at him. I'm not asking you to decide everything this morning, he said. I'm asking you to let me be someone you can count on. Not because you need to be rescued. You've made it very clear you don't, but because the point isn't rescue. The point is, I want to be the person who saves you a seat, who notices when your glass is empty, who is paying attention on purpose because you are worth paying attention to. He paused. I know you're still finding your footing. I know the ground shifted not very long ago, and it doesn't just resettle overnight. I'm not in a hurry. He looked at her steadily. I'm just asking, will you let me be someone who shows up? Consistently, honestly, for as long as you'll have me? The October light moved across the counter. Corrine thought about a bathroom mirror and a flatly spoken sentence and 9 months of being invisible in her own life. She thought about a gown at the back of a closet and a mother's note and an amber earring warm against her jaw. She thought about a man who had noticed her glass was empty and refilled it without making it a moment, because that was simply who he was. Yes, she said. He crossed the room and slid the ring onto her finger and held her hand in both of his for a moment without speaking. In the window behind them, the October light continued to do what it was doing, which was exactly what it needed to. They were married the following April in a small ceremony at a restored farmhouse outside the city, the kind of place that looked like it had been designed for exactly one perfect morning. Corrine wore ivory. Her best friend Tamara gave a toast that made people laugh and then immediately cry. Dr. Foss was there. Mrs. Alderton was there. The people who had actually shown up for her life were there, all of them, filling a room with the specific warmth of people gathered for a thing they are genuinely happy about. Sutton cried a little when she walked in. He did not appear to be embarrassed about this. The year after the wedding, Corrine gave birth to a daughter. They named her May, after Corrine's mother, whose amber earrings now lived in a small dish on the dresser, and who would have, Corrine was certain, had plenty of opinions about Sutton, and every single one of them would have been correct. Sutton sat in the hospital room in the particular stillness of a man who has just been handed something that reconfigures the meaning of every prior thing. He held May against his chest and looked at Corrine, and did not say anything for a long moment, because there was nothing to say that the silence wasn't already saying better. Corrine looked at him from the hospital bed, tired and luminous and entirely, completely herself, and understood that the thing her mother's note had been about, the night you need to remember who you are, had been preparation for more than one night. It had been preparation for the whole sequence of nights that followed, for the choosing and the rebuilding and the arriving, at last, at something that deserved the word home. As for Philip Hadley, there is not much left to say, because there was not much left. He worked. He lived alone. He kept his head down and managed what remained of what he had built, which was less than it had been, and more than he had any right to complain about. He was not a villain, not precisely. He was a man who had made choices, small and large, that compounded in the direction of his own diminishment, and he lived now in the particular quiet of someone who understands that. Not destroyed, just reduced, just permanently, precisely aware of the size of what he had thrown away. On a Tuesday in March, his assistant left a news alert on his desk without comment. Hearthline Foundation announces expansion to 12 sites across 4 states. There was a photograph. Corrine at a podium, animated, mid-sentence, the way she looked when she was talking about something she had built and believed in. Sutton in the second row, watching her with the uncomplicated expression of a man who already knows the ending and finds it exactly right. Philip looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he set it aside and went back to work, and carried the weight of knowing exactly what he had built, and exactly what he had chosen to walk away from, one clean sentence at a time, until there was nothing left to walk away from, and nowhere left to go but forward into the smaller, quieter life that was, in every meaningful sense, precisely the life he had chosen.